Now going, I just lost my button to go live. Nope, we are now live. Okay. So that is your fair warning. And hello to Dr. Brabson on the other end of the stream. He is not able to be here today. He is in Albuquerque. Every time I say Albuquerque, I just think of the Looney Tunes cartoons. I should have taken a left at Albuquerque. But he is in with us, and we started a little bit later, Dr. Brabson, because we decided it was not a great idea to have prayer requests and maybe highs or lows streamed to YouTube. So we apologize for that. But thank you for those of you who are here just for this class. I'm excited more for the next 2 weeks when Dr. Brabson is at the helm of the class leading the discussion. But I'm excited to talk about the topic as well. So the format is I'm up on the bookends. This week is more Old Testament discussions related to creation care. Then Dr. Brabson will talk a little bit about climate change and practical steps forward for all of us. And then the fourth week, I'll come to New Testament and address some key ideas, maybe even objections, and that'll be the close of this 4-week series. So I'm going to ask you to do something which is incredibly difficult on a topic like this, and it is to set aside all your political lenses. Again, very difficult to do, especially on a topic like this. And I've noticed over the past decade how politics is taking over everything. Yeah. You notice this? Okay? Yes. So we used to say we don't talk about religion or politics at the kitchen table. That is increasingly more difficult because every topic seems to have a political avenue or angle to it. So I'm going to ask you to set aside the political lens and think with me about the Bible and what the Bible has to say about God's creation and creation care. Challenging, but I think it will be productive. And Dr. Brabson says good morning to everybody in the room. So, okay, so if we're talking about the Bible and creation care, you have to start in Eden, right? It's a good thing to start in the beginning. And if you get this part wrong, it makes a world of difference where you end up. I think you all know I used to dive in high school. That was my sport. And just a small error at the beginning of the dive, leaning 5 degrees back, and you might eat the board. Leaning 5 degrees forward, and you're okay. 10 degrees forward and you might be in the shallow end of the pool. You know, it just makes a world of difference, your initial trajectory, where you land. So we need to spend some time thinking about the Garden of Eden and creation, because that's going to have a huge impact on where we land. Biblical theology starts in the beginning, in the garden. And a few key questions that I want to ask and wrestle with you all this morning. Who is God? What do we learn about God from these initial chapters of the book of Genesis, of our Bible? Who and what is man and woman? And why are we here? So just a few questions. Obviously, all of these are multi-week conversations. And we're only touching on these as it relates to the topic of creation care. Not as it relates to every reason we're here, right? Or everything we could say about God. We would be here much longer than the hour that we have. So, from the early chapters of Genesis, obviously, we know that God is the creator God. We know that God created not out of need, but out of delight. This is one of the kind of beauties of the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. That being eternally in three persons, God did not have need. Not need for relationship. He was always in eternal, beautiful, intimate relation. So God created, but not out of a need that he had, which sets the creation story of Genesis apart from many, many other ancient Near Eastern creation stories. Those other creation stories are out there. You can read them online. One of them is, for example, Enuma Elish, a very well-known creation narrative. But the story you get from Enuma Elish is very, very different than the creation narrative of Genesis. In Enuma Elish, the creation, heaven and earth, came about out of a cosmic conflict between the god Marduk and a goddess and the chaos monster. And you don't get this sense that it's Marduk's, will and delight to create. It's almost accident that it happens out of this war, this cosmic war. In other ancient Near Eastern creation accounts, the gods created because they were tired of doing the manual labor of the farming. And so they created man and woman to go out and work in the fields for them and provide for them. It was a creation out of need. And what we get in the narrative of Genesis and elsewhere in the Bible is not a God who created out of need, but out of delight. He is a creative creator God. And we see in the early chapters of Genesis the institution of Sabbath, right? The seventh day of rest. In Genesis chapter 1, Moses writes, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, this is the end of day 6. It was very good." He's created the firmament. He's created the seas, the sky, the dry land, the vegetation, the creepy crawlies, and us, and it's all very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had made, and he rested. Now God, being Almighty God, was not fatigued. He was not tired. He did not need a nap. This rest is a rest of sitting down and enjoying and delighting, overseeing the created order, like a sculptor might sit and look at his masterpiece. So he rests and delights in his creation. Just a reminder, we all know this, but God has not thrown us into, a back alley gutter creation. It's a beautiful creation. He delights in it. These are just some of the most beautiful places I've been, right? Just by way of reminder. One of my favorite places, Letchworth State Park in New York. Just down the road from where we went to college. Used to love going there and studying, jumping off of cliffs and swimming in the river, and just beautiful, beautiful land. One of the more beautiful places I've seen is the foothill of the Andes Mountains in Bolivia. Just awe-inspiring. White beaches of Fiji, where my parents were missionaries, suffering for Jesus in the Fiji Islands. A waterfall also in Fiji, fairly untouched, and if I picked the right one off of Google, there's a rope swing just kind of over here that you can swing out and into the pool, and it's amazing, untouched, beautiful. Joshua Tree out in California. And these beautiful places aren't just far off. These are all taken from my backyard a few years ago. Just the beauty that God has created and put us in. He created a beautiful home for us. Not just a blank, sterile house, but a home. I'm stealing that language from John Walton, who came here and did a seminar several years ago. God didn't just create a house, but a home for us. It's beautiful and comfortable, and we ought to delight in because God delights in it. One of the passages that I would encourage you to take time and read is Psalm 104. Psalm 104 talks about how God, it's a hymn of creation, and it talks about how God took great care in creating. He measured things out. He laid the foundations. He erected the beams to hold the sky up. He placed mountains in the right places. The language is he placed them where he appointed them to go. It wasn't haphazard. It was very intentional, very measured out, his creation. And then in Psalm 104, it moves from the past tense, he did this, to the present tense. He's still providentially caring for his world. He causes the grass to grow. He waters the trees. He feeds the animals and their young. And then towards the end of the psalm, the psalmist declares, "May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works." God delights, he rejoices in his creation. The beauty of it, the order of it, it reflects him and his glory. God delights in it. Okay, so I had, like every kid, right? Lots of toys growing up. I liked my toys. I had, my Cap guns and my Star Wars action figures and G.I. Joes, but I had one particular toy that was exceptionally important to me. It was this programmable tank. It had a keypad on the top of it, and you could program it and say, go 6 feet, make a left turn, go 2 feet, make a right turn, shoot your cannon, and then keep rolling. It was fantastic. I was, I think, 11, 10 when I got this for Christmas. And it lasted about 2 weeks. My sister, who has never lived this down, she was 4 at the time, tried to ride my tank and crushed it. And I have never let her live that down. She probably broke many of my other toys, right? That's what little sisters do. But that one in particular, I took great delight in, right? And so I was especially hurt when she broke my toy tank, because it was something I delighted in. God delights in his creation. And so it is an offense to him not to care for his creation. Is anyone in here in the book group that is reading Dante's Divine Comedy right now? A couple of you? Okay.
Started.
Yeah, I'm a little stalled myself, but I think I'm on Canto 16. But in Canto 11, Dante is describing, it's the 7th ring, the most outer ring of hell. And he says it's reserved for those who do wrong unto deity, who nature and her goodness do despise, and God blaspheme, and in their hearts deny. So, not caring for God's creation is, in Dante's words, a way of despising God, because he delights in his creation. Okay, obviously there's a lot more we could say about God than we just have said, right? But from the early chapters of Genesis, you get the sense that God delights in his creation. Well, what about us? And I should pause. Any thoughts, questions, pushback?
Well, it sounds like that after he created, he looked at it and said, wow, this is really good. I mean,
Yeah.
God saw that it was good. I just agree, God delights in it.
Yeah. So the word good shows, I believe it's 7 times in Genesis chapter 1. It's just this repeated kind of almost mantra. It's good. It's good. It is really, really good. Just so you don't miss that, Great. Okay, so that's what it says about God. What does it tell us about us as his image bearers? I think this is the 3rd or maybe 4th time that image bearing has come up in this ACG. When we were doing Old Testament foundations, it came up a couple times there. When we were talking about race and racism, it came up there. And it's coming up again. It is that foundational to our understanding of who we are. But so often we rush to this part, that we're created in the image of God, the part that makes us stand apart and unique from creation. No other part of God's created world is said to bear his image in this way. We rush right to that, the part that makes us distinct from creation. And I think we rush past something that is very, very important, that we are created. Before we are ever over creation, before we're ever distinct from creation, excuse me, we are very much a part of God's creation. We aren't creator, right? We are created. So we are in community with the created order. I said a few minutes ago that God didn't need creation. He isn't dependent on his creation. But we very much are, right? While God is independent of creation, he's not dependent on it. He doesn't need it. We very much do. We are dependent on it. We need it. We are in community with the created order. So yes, we are created in the image of God. As image bearers, one of the implications of this is that we are vice regents. We are vice regents. I'm pausing here to read a comment from Dr. Brabson. The marvelous and incredible, beautiful world of all the quarks inside the proton are another example of beauty. And that is beyond my, I've never seen a quark inside the proton, but one of the things that I do love is the beauty of the micro and then zooming out to the beauty of the macro too. How small and beautiful God's creation is, and yet how infinitely large and expanding it is also. But, thank you, Dr. Brabson. So as God's image bearers, we are vice regents, which means we rule in God's stead. He has delegated authority to us to rule over creation. He's given us the job of ruling over and caring for his creation as his vice regents. And so he gives us this mandate to subdue and have dominion over his created order, not by abusing it or tyrannically using it, but by stewarding it, by working and keeping it. In the ancient Near East, I think I have mentioned this in previous classes, in the ancient Near East, kings often would erect monuments to themselves, sometimes up on mountains overlooking villages, as a way of reminding the villagers, the townspeople, the city folk, that this is the king that rules over this land. So the image would be a reminder of who reigned over, this valley, this region. That is in part what it means to be image bearers. We extend, we demonstrate God's rule as a kind of a reminder to us and to the created order. We are in God's image. He's the one who is reigning. So our authority, I kind of want to put quotes in that, right, isn't original. It's derived. It's been delegated to us. So as authority that's been delegated to us, it has confines and it has limits. It ought to reflect the kind of rule and reign that God has over his own creation. Right? If God does not rule tyrannically over creation, we ought not either. Psalm 8, I think, is instructive here. Psalm 8 says, "When you look at the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, the son of man that you care for him? Yet you made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands, and you have put all things under his feet." But again, because we have been placed in this role, we ought to reflect our Creator God's, the Supreme King's, priorities and heart in exercising our dominion. there's some notorious figures in fiction and lore who did not do that, right? So, the Sheriff of Nottingham from this is the Kevin Costner Robin Hood movie, right? Well, it was ruling in place of King Richard, who was off in the Crusades, but did not rule in a kind way as King Richard did. He was a tyrant and was eventually deposed, and Kevin Costner stabbed him in the heart. You know? I don't remember his name, but he was the steward of Gondor, who was not the rightful king, but was reigning in the Lord of the Rings series in place of the rightful king, but again was tyrannical and not a good ruler. And that's me, 12 years old. So my parents would leave the house and leave me in charge of my brother and sisters, and I was a tyrant. I locked my sister one time in the cellar because she was annoying me. Not the basement. It was not a pleasant, nice, it was a cellar. Rock walls and... but none of us look at any of these as models of how we ought to rule, right?
No.
Our rule that has been delegated to us ought to reflect God's heart for his creation. And God delights in his creation. He cares for it. Still, not just initially when he established it, but he still cares for his creation. Okay. That picture should never be seen again. Okay. So when God created Adam and Eve, he created them east of Eden and then placed them in Eden as garden wardens to watch over, to keep his garden. In a sense, they were steward priests in this temple, in this garden. They were given we talked about this a little bit, dominion already. They're supposed to be ruling over this garden and subdue God's created order. Dominion does not mean tyrannical rule. And subdue, it does mean subjugate, to establish mastery over. But it does not necessarily need to be it shouldn't be a harsh subduing. The image that comes to my mind is a potter subduing a lump of clay and molding it into something that he has in his mind. This image, and he's subduing it, working it, forming it. That is the mandate that comes to us, that we have dominion and we ought to subdue the created order. Oh, Chris Brasham just reminded me of who the person from the Lord of the Rings is. Denethor. So, sounds like Skeletor to me. Okay, so dominion, exercise our rule. Subdue, but not in an abusive way. Subdue is, a potter would subdue a lump of clay, forming it. We are not expected to leave nature alone and do nothing with it. That's not the Genesis mandate, the cultural mandate that comes to us in Genesis. God expects us to build, to create, to spread, to flourish, but to do so in such a way that it reflects the way he rules over his creation. Again, I'm stuck on Dante because I'm reading Dante a little bit. Dante has this image of usury, and usury is a sin because it deprives God, in his language, it deprives God of his grandchildren. And at first I read that and I'm like, what in the world do you mean here? And frankly, I didn't know until I watched the video that explained what he meant. But God created us and expects us to go out and create. Our creations are God's grandchildren in Dante's poem. So part of the cultural mandate that comes to us in Genesis is to go out and do that. Had Adam and Eve or their children after them just lived wild, not built homes, not gathered, not created culture, they would have been in breach of the Genesis mandate when God says, work it, keep it, flourish, have dominion over creation and subdue it. So going out and building and creating, it's part of what we're called to do, but we're supposed to do it in a way that reflects God's heart for his world. Yeah, Jack, please.
My version says take care of it.
Okay.
Take care.
Yeah. In
Instead of
Genesis
keep it.
2:15?
Yeah.
Okay. What version are you reading? Jack, do you know?
NIV.
Okay. Take care of it. That's definitely part of what's behind these words. But these two words, work it and keep it, stand out because they are temple language, interestingly. We're supposed to cultivate and guard the garden. This language is repeated in Numbers chapter 3. And it's talking about the priests and the Levites who were given a mandate to protect and to guard and to serve in the tabernacle. And it says, and they shall guard over him and over the whole creation before the tent of meeting. That's this word. Keep is also translated guard from the Hebrew. As they minister at the time, they shall guard all the furnishings, the tent of meeting, and keep guard over the people of Israel as they minister in the temple, or in the tabernacle, So in the early chapters of Genesis, you get this picture of Eden, not just as this beautiful garden, but Eden as a temple, where God meets with man, and man is given this temple kind of commission to keep it and to guard it. Adam is in many ways established as a priest in this garden. The mandate was to extend the Garden of Eden by filling and subduing God's creation, forming it. And Eden was in many ways a prototype of what is to come when God establishes his final kingdom, the new heavens and the new earth. Beautiful picture of Eden, what it means to live as God's priests in his creation. Okay. Another passage that comes to mind when I think about how we ought to care for the world is the parable of the talents. This is from Jesus, Matthew chapter, I believe it's 25. And Jesus tells this parable about a master who's leaving on a trip, and he gives the servants in his home a certain amount of talents. One he gives 10, one he gives 5, one he gives 1 to take care of, to guard and to keep. I don't know if that's the language that is used necessarily. But when the master returns, he asks an account of what they have done. And one of the people comes back and says, I doubled your money. You gave me 10, I'm returning 20. Another one says, you gave me 5, I'm returning another 5 in addition. But one did nothing with it and is condemned as a wicked servant, wicked and lazy servant. He didn't do anything. So I think when you look at Genesis 1, we're not called to do nothing with creation, but to build, to create, and do it in a way that reflects God's heart. Okay. Oh, yep, Matthew 25. Any questions on how I understand Genesis 1 and 2, the Garden of Eden? Yeah, Joel.
If you're gonna cover this later, then it's okay, you can answer it later. Whenever there's a theological position that's put out, I'm always curious about the history of it. So I'm wondering if you are aware of the extent to which sort of creation care and this theology of taking care of creation was discussed among the early church fathers and other theologians across the centuries, or is this more of a recent 20th, 21st century development?
I'm not broadly read on early church, views of creation and how we interact with creation. I know reading a good bit of Augustine, there is definitely this sense in Confessions and in City of God that God has established good we ought to treat his creation well because he delights in his creation. Augustine reflects on that in Confessions quite a bit. But beyond that, I have not read widely in early church literature on creation and creation care.
That's okay.
Yep. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay. Yeah, Sam.
The parable of talents, I know we're not going to spend all day talking about it, but I find it among the more difficult parables.
Sure.
Because part of it's in relation to how people respond to who they perceive the ruler as being.
Okay.
So if I'm afraid of the ruler, I sure as heck want to make sure I don't lose at least the one talent I have. And if I'm not afraid of the ruler, then I'm willing to take certain risks to create more. And it sometimes feels like it gets presented too simply in terms of why one would call that person who preserved and didn't use or at least consume that
Yeah,
as a wicked keeper or
Okay.
a wicked steward.
Wicked steward. Right. Yeah, it dovetails with a difficult aspect of our theology proper, our understanding of God. And we are called to love God, to delight in God. We know he's merciful and he's compassionate. And we balance that, we hold that in tension with also the doctrine or the understanding that we're supposed to fear God. And how those two how we live in the tension of delighting in God, loving God, and fearing God, I think undergirds how we interpret that parable. It's not one or the other, it's both and. If fear overwhelms the love and the desire to please God, then we're probably going to default to the, in the parable, the lazy servant who does nothing for fear of offending God. And that's not what we're called to do, right? We're called to step out, to act in faith, to risk failing, because God is merciful and loving and kind.
But in that parable, we don't get a chance to see if somebody invested the 10 and it all was lost.
Truth, right? We don't. Yep. Tim.
And we don't know whether the two that made double the money got it from the widows and orphans and stole their land. Seriously.
Okay.
There's no, interest is not allowed,
Right.
okay?
Sure.
So what are you gonna do? I can take interest. I don't know whether the master is wicked or good. in
Okay.
this, and I'm actually thinking that master's kind of wicked, because he didn't call the other two, say, did you get this properly?
Okay.
Are these
So-
ill-gotten gains?
No, you're right. If you take the story only kind of a closed narrative,
Right.
broaden it, and who's telling the story? Who is Jesus portraying as? Jesus is portraying God the Father as the master who's coming back and asking, what have you done? So you have to import all the biblical teaching about justice into this. He's commending, right, these men who've earned back the money and stewarded his resources well. But yeah, if you treat it just as a closed narrative, then you don't get those answers. But I think you have to broaden a little bit. Okay, definitely don't want this to turn into a series on the parables, so because I'm not prepared for that. Okay, so we're placed in the land to work it, to keep it. It is very clear from the biblical record that we are not the owners of the land, right? We are tenant vassals. It's true in Eden. It is definitely true in Israel when they go into the promised land. God says, I'm establishing you in this land. It's my land. I'm giving it to you. It's a land grant. And the pattern follows very much the ancient suzerain vassal kind of treaties that you would get in the ancient Near East, where the suzerain, the lord, grants the vassals the land to work, to keep. They give a portion to him. He protects them, but it's his land. The promised land, and you can definitely extend this to the entirety of the earth, belongs to God, right? Deuteronomy 10:14, behold, the Lord your God, to the Lord your God belong the heavens and the heavens of heavens, and the earth and with all that is in it. And there's multiple other passages. Psalm 24 stands out. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Thank you. I'm at an angle I couldn't read it. And the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell in it, for he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. It's his. We are tenants here, tenants who ought to take good care of, right? We don't want to lose our security deposit. Take good care of the land that we have been given. Maybe not given, loaned is maybe a better word. Okay. So thus far, the point has been that God created his world, he delights in it, and we are his vice regents and priests who ought to rule in his stead, but rule in a way that reflects his heart, his care, his delight in his creation as tenants and priests in the land. Moving forward, I want to unpack just a couple examples from the Old Testament of what this could and should look like. The usual script, how we usually tell the story, is God created a home for us. Again, not just a house, but a home for us. It's well appointed. That is truth. I don't want to take away from that at all. But to balance that, God created us for himself, for relationship with him. Part of being created for relationship with God, the responsibility that comes with that, is that we are to caretake his garden, his world. So how do we do that? It's a privilege and a responsibility. What do we see some of the responsibilities being? And I'm specifically focusing on Old Testament. We'll move into New Testament later, I guess 3 weeks from now. Let me pause here. Ben has a comment. He says, interestingly, we are also completely dependent on the rest of nature. Without trees, there are no humans. Absolutely. Has anyone read the book Overstory?
Yes.
Okay, it's a long read, and it takes a while to get into it. But it's a really, really interesting novel about trees. And about our dependence and codependence on an overlooked aspect of God's creation, the trees, and how old and ancient and important and connected and living trees are. I'd recommend it. You maybe have to plow for the first couple hundred pages, and then it really picks up. But it's great.
No wonder you haven't gotten to Dante.
Yeah, I'm behind, that is for sure. Okay. So one aspect that stands out from Old Testament is that the practice of agriculture was supposed to be a generous agriculture. Leviticus 23:22, and when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field up to the edge. You shall gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. You own a field. You only, according to the law, are supposed to reap about 80% of that field. You're leaving the edges out of generosity, out of a way of caring for the poor and the sojourner among you. If I own a field, here's the dialogue that's going on in my head, right? I'm not being as efficient as I could be. I could reap it all and maximize my profit. And God says, no. The goal of maximum profit, that's not my goal. My goal is caring for my world and caring for the people in it, right? The poor and the sojourners. And I could even go to the next level and say, yeah, but if I don't reap it all, then I have less to sell. Market prices might go up. I know a little bit about economics, right? There's not as much supply, prices go up. And God says, no. Again, my concern isn't profit or maximizing profit. It's treating the land well and treating people well. So there's this generous overtone to how the people of Israel were commanded to live their lives even at the level of how much of their field they gleaned. That's beautiful. It's beautiful. We don't know how well it was practiced, but the mandate is there. Beyond that, we know about the Sabbath laws. For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. And you shall do likewise with your vineyard and your olive orchard. And then not just the 6 years, but the 6 days. 6 days you do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the sons of your servant woman and the alien may be refreshed. I mean, just so much to unpack here, right? Again, I'm a landowner. I'm thinking, I am only 6/7 as productive as I could be, right? I could get more labor out of myself or my animals or my servants, but no, I'm commanded to be less productive than I could be and take a day to rest, as God did, to delight in his creation. And the rest isn't just for me, it's also for my animals. God's concern does not end at the edges of humanity, right? It extends to the whole of the created order, including beasts of burden. Dumb ox, dumb donkeys, God cares for them. And then the 6th or the 7th year is a year where the land lies fallow. And what grows naturally is for the poor to go glean, for the sojourner, for the beasts, and a time for the land to replenish the nutrients of the soil so that it can be farmed in a sustainable, ongoing way. Again, the goal isn't maximum profit today at the expense of good, healthy farmland tomorrow. There's a long-term kind of vision here. Okay, so profits today cannot come at the expense of tomorrow. We can't rob, this is one commentator, we can't rob our children and grandchildren to amass wealth for one more year of productivity this year. More of that comes in Leviticus 25. For 6 years you shall sow your field. In 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its fruits. The 7th year there shall be a Sabbath, a solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. So again, this practice of letting the ground lie fallow, which we know is good, sustainable agricultural practice, right? Allowing the land to replenish the nutrients in the soil. Interestingly, you can go back and read. So I was joking with someone that last week, 2 weeks ago, I was reading about education and race and racism, and this week I was reading about farming and agriculture, and I love my job, it's just get to be a generalist. And I was reading articles about salination and sediment in ancient Near East and some biblical journal, and it was great. Ben says the health of the soil we will see is closely related to how we store carbon in the soil. Ben, I can't wait for you to be here and speak to the science of that, because that is beyond my realm of expertise for sure. But I do know something about the collapse of the Sumerian and the Babylonian kingdoms. The kingdom of Sumer collapse probably began under the reign of Entenemec, around 2400 BC. He began a massive project of irrigation from the Tigris River to feed into the land of Gersu, robbing people downstream of water they needed, but also making the land surrounding his Gersu much, much more productive right? They were able to flood the fields, let the fields dry, crops grow. A massive canal was built that would irrigate the land. But it over-salinated the soil. The water table rose, and there's this really cool juncture of archaeology and climatology that happened, and it's, as you're reading soil and what happened thousands of years ago, it's really, really interesting. But the water table rose and brought salt up, and the water that was being irrigated, brought from the Tigris River, had salt in it as well. And over the records, ancient records say the fields were white. The soil was white. That's how salty it became, and then it became utterly unproductive. So in the short term, it looks, hey, this is great. We can increase our productivity, but not done in a responsible way that kind of honors the natural ecosystem and ends up bringing down a kingdom. Hammurabi in the 18th century had a similar kind of problem on his hands. Cities were growing larger. The need to feed people was, increasing. And so they shortened how often, or the fallow year became less frequent in Hammurabi's Assyrian kingdom, and eventually led to food shortages, massive famines, and the collapse of not the Neo-Assyrian Empire, but the old Assyrian Empire. So interesting how the wisdom of God is kind of baked into the law. It might mean you forego profit today, this week, this year, but it's for the good of the land. Any thoughts, questions? If you ask me too much more about the ancient Near East and I cannot say that word, antimonic, good. Because I am not an expert on the ancient Near East cultures, other than, to call myself an expert on the Bible culture is a stretch too, but Jack.
Going back to gleaning, when I had some animals back in '84, and I asked this farmer to, after he got done picking, to glean this field, and I got a whole pickup load full of corn.
Okay.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
Feed my pigs, and I had some cows and chickens.
Great. Just on what was left over, right?
Right. A whole
Yeah.
pickup load.
So
After he already, and that's in modern time where he already went around and picked the field.
with the combine, right? Yeah. So I mean, in Israel's code, they were supposed to leave the edges, and they were not supposed to go back over the field twice.
Right.
So whatever was left was, think of the story of Ruth, right? For Ruth and those who were in fragile economic positions. Okay, another example like that from the ancient Near East and Israel relates to kind of the hunting and gathering practices of the people of Israel. So Deuteronomy 22, if you come across a bird in its nest and a tree or on the ground with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young or the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall let the mother go, but the young you may take for yourself, that it may go well with you and that you may live long. So what's the rationale behind this, do you think?
Sustainability. I mean, if you kill all the birds, like, at one point, there was hardly any deer in Indiana. They'd almost killed all the deer out
Okay.
by hunting, and they've come back.
Yeah, that's hard to believe.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
I mean, they were almost all gone. It was really bad. And then this is very sad. This is like in the last year.
Well, we've hunted out all the bears, there used to be bears.
Right.
Yep. You think of buffalo, bison in the
Right.
West, just overhunt.
Those were almost all gone.
Yeah, so if you take the mother, you've now cut off, the source of future eggs and younglings, right? So it's a lack of sustainability.
But you leave the mother grieving for her lost young.
Sure. Yep.
But you had your dinner.
Yep.
True.
there is a delicate balance, right? Because God does, I mean, we see that in Psalm 104 and so many Psalms. God does care for the animal. And one of my favorite stories about that is the story of Jonah. You remember, God sends Jonah to Nineveh to proclaim, repent or else. And God says to Jonah, I can't remember what the exact number is, there's 100,000 people living in this city and a lot of cattle. I care for the cattle as well as the people living in the city. So there's an interesting, delicate balance there. But yeah, the idea of sustainability, of the animals being able to reproduce so that you can continue to hunt and to gather. This is from the 7th century BC in a British museum. It's from the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which is the Assyrian Empire we read about in our Bible. Probably from Tiglath-Pileser III, who is also mentioned in the Bible. And it's of a royal hunt. And part of the coronation of a new king would have to kill a lion to be deemed, brave and strong. Now, they did not go out into the wild to kill the lion. The lion was caught, caged, and then released into a hunting park in the capital city, with soldiers guarding the future king and making sure the lion didn't escape. So it was very much a staged kind of hunt. And this is a relief of the hunting party coming back. Here you have the dead lion. Notice what you have here in the hand. It's bird's nest. And in that hand, the mother bird, probably. Not necessarily. Maybe it could be the father bird, right? But you have bird and bird nest. It's just an interesting, contrast to what we see there in the biblical text. Okay. Got one more. Oh, I zoomed in on it for you. So the bird and the nest. Okay. One more example of a specific law. And commentators look at several of these kinds of laws, the sustainable agriculture, the not killing or taking the mother, as, I forget the exact phrase, proto partota. So the part stands for the whole. If you're not supposed to do this with a mother bird, you probably shouldn't do it with a mother deer. If you're not supposed to farm this way, you probably shouldn't fish this way. So the part kind of stands for the whole. You take and you extend the principle out. Another principle like this is how Israel was to wage war. Yes, Israel did wage war, right? We know that. But in Deuteronomy 20, when you besiege a city for a long time, making war against it in order to take it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. You may eat from them, but you shall not cut them down. Are the trees in the field human, that they should be besieged by you? Only the trees that you know are not trees for food you may destroy and cut down, that you may build siege works. So even the trees that you cut down is for a limited purpose, right? To build siege works. It's not go in and level the ground, go in and wage kind of eco-terrorism against the city that you're besieging. But if you have to build siege works, make sure you find non-fruit-bearing trees to do it. Both that command about the bird and this one kind of come with the promise that it may go well with you in the land. Again, contrast this with how the Assyrian kind of shock and awe way of waging war. This is Sargon II, who is a biblical character. He says, I entered triumphantly into his pleasant gardens. The adornments of his city, which were overflowing with fruit and wine, came tumbling down. His great trees, the adornments of his palace, I cut them down like millet. The trunks of all those trees which I had cut down, I gathered together, heaped them in a pile, and burned them with fire. So the Assyrian way of waging war was shock and awe. Devastate the land around the city that you're besieging. If it falls, fantastic. If it doesn't, you've left them impoverished and weakened. They won't come and fight against you because they have nothing to eat, nothing to build with. You've ruined their economy and their livelihoods. So in the ancient Near East, go back to this. The trees that God has in mind here that are fruit-bearing trees, it includes the fig, the date, the olive, the apricot, the sycamore, certain kind of sycamore, the almond, the pistachio, the walnut. So lots of trees that were contributing to the food of the people there. And they're forbidden from destroying them. I mean, can you imagine the frustration? We need to build siege works. So there's a great grove of trees. Nope, that's an olive grove. Can't do that one. There's a pistachio grove. Can't do that. Got to go farther, But it's not about convenience. It's about sustainability. And again, this is a principle that ought to be, it's pars proto toto. The part stands for the whole. You extend this principle out further. Okay. Any thoughts, questions on kind of this main point? Not only are we to care, but God lays down specific laws that demonstrate his concern. Yeah, Jack.
This is secondhand, so I don't know how true it is, but someone was telling me the other day about Procter and Gamble going into Canada and just cutting down virgin trees, I guess to make toilet paper or whatever,
Okay.
but yeah, just mowing them all down.
Yeah, I mean,
Sad.
we
If
know
they are,
that.
I don't know.
Yeah, and they take. So one of the things I learned from Overstory was how long some of these trees have taken. Thousands of years. Some of them have been around in the forests of.
I mean, I'm not
Pacific
against cutting
Northwest
down
and-
trees. My dad logged and
Sure.
hauled logs and stuff, but
Yeah, but to do
doing
it
it in the right way,
yeah,
you know.
because they don't. I mean, there's a saying: you don't plant an olive tree for yourself. You plant it for your grandchildren. Because it takes more than 20 years for some of these fruit-bearing trees to start bearing fruit. So having a short-sighted view of how we use these is not biblical, not a godly way.
And the sadness of the Amazon rainforest, all those people, just for profit.
Sure.
It's incredible.
Yeah. I have not done enough research to know if this holds true or not, but there's images that I've seen from reputable magazines of the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
And the Dominican Republic is very forested,
Yeah.
and Haiti is denuded, the landscape. And it's stark when you see the photos. There's a dirt road and trees and then nothing, wasteland, because of unsustainable kind of forestry practices. Yeah. Yeah,
I feel
Ashley.
like it's worth mentioning, I might be a bit of a rabbit trail, but there is a school of thought just to be aware of among evangelicals in particular, and there was a professor at Calvin, I don't know if he's still there, who firmly, he could embrace all this, but when the New Testament came, it canceled out a lot of this, and if you look at end times eschatology, he would advocate, and there are many that advocate, we should use up all of our resources because that will bring Christ's return faster. And so that is a very, to us, it sounds, me in particular, it sounds like anathema, but it's a very real school of thought that is promoted among evangelicals. So just to be aware that that's there.
And that's
It's important to know.
That's what I'm really going to focus on the fourth week of this series is, Peter's language of this is all burning up and passing away, why bother? Do we, polish the brass on a sinking ship kind of thing? I would definitely have words with that Calvin professor. I think that's a very irresponsible approach. I'd love to get that name so I could read some of this stuff. But.
Yeah, who is that?
I'll have to look it up.
Okay, that'd be
I learned
great.
about it when I was at Wheaton taking geology classes. We
Wow,
got
okay.
views, so.
Yeah.
Isn't that one of the reasons we changed our name?
Because
I mean.
I don't know.
Because we don't wanna be in line with that.
Sure. Yeah, again, I would say the evangelical movement is very broad because there is the evangelical environmental network too, that we would want to align with and on this. But so yeah, I think we definitely have to respond to the New Testament, or the attitude that the New Testament, does away with the old and we're not beholden to any of this kind of language. In our eschatology, what does the end look like? How much continuity is there between this earth and the new heavens and new earth that Isaiah, Jeremiah talks about, Revelation envisions? So good things to think about. Please, if you have a chance this week, read through Psalm 104, and I would say maybe even do it every night. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, this is part of the Vesper service every night, this hymn of creation. And then next week, Dr. Brabson will be with us, and some of the kind of modern concerns, very contemporary concerns, Dr. Brabson will be helping us wrestle with. He actually says, as we move into the future, is sustainability sufficient? It's a fantastic question. Dr. Brabson, I will leave you to deal with that. Should we not think in terms of flourishing regeneration of the goodness of the earth? So I would assume he means undoing the damage that we have done, not just sustainability, but restoration, which will then play into what I'm talking about in week 4 too, renewal, restoration, new heavens, new earth. So,
can we make a quick advertisement on that note, though, is that we've been having, Wednesday night was our first gathering of, Nadie and I were working with Bob and Creation Care Partners to try and help people understand what you can do personally to help alleviate some of these problems with the environment. We had our first one on Wednesday night. The Van Nests were very gracious and were there. And we'll do it again Sunday right after church, next Sunday right after church. So if you'll come back to this room right after church next Sunday, I just want you to be prepared.
and this coming Wednesday too.
Well, we're not gonna, oh yeah, we are doing Wednesday, sorry,
Yes.
I thought we were, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so this Wednesday and this. Yep.
And
Not next Sunday, but the Sunday after.
Okay, that's what it was, one of
Yeah.
them.
So,
Sorry.
no,
I'm
at the
glad you're
welcome
here.
at the welcome center there are sign-up sheets for those workshops, and it's this coming Wednesday and next Sunday the 7th. Okay,
That
sorry.
is a church, all church
Right.
luncheon.
Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great morning in worship. And I will end the live stream now. Thank you, Dr. Brabson.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Dan.
Practice all week.
Actually, do you want to?
It's interesting for us to know.
Downstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, long story.